A slippery slope to death on demand, a move that would prey on vulnerable people to end their lives for fear of being a burden. That's one side of this impassioned argument. The other, that a change in the law is well overdue to prevent unnecessary suffering to those who are dying, a compassionate measure to give agency and choice to the terminally ill. Friday's parliamentary vote will determine which argument prevails among MPs, but support for a change in the law among people in England and Wales far outweighs opposition to it. A new poll by the think tank More in Common found 65% of the public support assisted dying, 13% oppose it and 22% were undecided. 55% said they would consider assisted dying if they were diagnosed with a terminal illness. 19% wouldn't, and 26% didn't know or wouldn't say.
That support isn't unconditional. It is based on having strong safeguards, in particular, we found, to protect those who are vulnerable. So we heard both in the focus groups and you see in the polling, the most convincing argument against legalisation is that people could feel pressured.
The new bill would substantially change the law as it stands. Intentionally helping another person to end their life is currently illegal. This new bill would give someone expected to die within 6 months the right to choose to end their own life. It requires 2 independent doctors and a judge to determine whether the person satisfies the criteria. That includes having the mental capacity to express a clear wish, free from coercion.
I think you should have the right to choose. Do you want to do this or not? Do you want good palliative care? I want all of these options because that's what giving people power, choice and control means.
And other ministers have also ignored pleas to keep their views on the issue quiet. Both the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, have said they'll vote against. She said the state should never offer death as a service. The bill only covers England and Wales, but similar moves are also underway in Scotland, the Isle of Man and Jersey. For now, though, all eyes are on Friday's free vote, which, if it passes, could herald one of the biggest societal changes in decades.
Sarah Beale there. Well, earlier I talked to the Labour peer and former Justice Secretary, Charlie Faulkner, who introduced his own assisted dying bill in the House of Lords a decade ago, and the Observer columnist, Sonia Soda, who also served as a special advisor to Ed Miliband when he was leader of the opposition, and she is opposed to the bill. I started by asking Lord Faulkner about concerns that people might be coerced into taking their own lives.
That is why 2 doctors and a High Court judge have got to be satisfied that this is a case where it is the free will of the person. Now, the Kim Ledbetter's bill is only available to people who've been on a GP's practice books for 12 months. It's conceivable that somebody might fool 1 doctor, but fooling 2 doctors and a High Court judge seems to us to be incredibly unlikely.
Sonia Soda, what does she say to that?
It's not about fooling. Actually, people in coercively controlling relationships sometimes aren't even aware of it themselves. It can be very hard for psychiatrists to detect coercive control, for example. The idea that 2 doctors are going to spot if somebody's in an abusive relationship, I think that that's for the birds.
But these are higher standards, aren't they, than we have in many countries who've had those laws in place for decades?
But we're talking about what's right for the UK and what we think will detect coercion in the UK. 2 doctors signing off is not going to do that. I've written about domestic abuse and coercive control. Even when these issues go to the family courts and you've got family court judges, some of them very experienced, running investigations, doing fact findings into whether there is coercive control and abuse, when there's an allegation of it, even then they get it wrong.
2 doctors, 2 hard-pressed GPs, and they are hard-pressed, ain't going to cut it. That's what Sonia said.
And a High Court judge. Well, let's look at other countries. There's been some countries that have had this sort of rule, this sort of assisted dying option for those who are terminally ill for over 25 years. There is absolutely no evidence there that there has been a problem of either abuse or coercive control. You would expect there to be at least 1 case or 2 cases but there isn't.
You can only say that if there's been proper investigations in these countries to see if abuse is an issue. I'm not aware of any investigation that's looked at that. So, yeah, sure, people aren't asking the question. So we can say people haven't found evidence of this, but that's not really good enough when you're talking about how a safeguard might work here in the UK.
Charlie Faulkner, coming on that point. We haven't found it because we haven't really been asking.
Well, when the law, for example, was introduced in Oregon, there were a lot of doctors that said this was a very bad thing to do. There was a lot of people concerned about abuse. So the fears that Sonia is referring to were fears that had been expressed before the law was introduced in Oregon, and the same in Victoria in Australia. So people were looking out for this, and it didn't happen.
I want to move on just to another key point here. This law is designed to affect people who are felt to have 6 months left, sadly, to live. Charlie Faulkner, that seems to be a bit of an arbitrary point of time, doesn't it? I mean, that's open to all sorts of medical disputes.
I don't think it's arbitrary. I think it's there in order to make it clear that this law is only available for those who are terminally ill, in the sense that they're going to die within a reasonably short period of time. This bill is not for people who say they are unbearably suffering without terminal illness. It's only about shortening the process of death.
Sonia Soto, I suspect you're not fully comfortable with that 6-month time frame?
Well, I mean, I think the issue is it's very hard to draw a tight definition around this, and the law will be ambiguous. And if you look at Oregon, where again it's limited to people with terminal conditions, what you've seen is that doctors, as a matter of policy, have just started defining some conditions as terminal. So extremely controversially, you've got some doctors in Oregon who have qualified anorexia as a terminal condition and offered assisted dying to people with anorexia. Now, survivors of anorexia find this horrifying because they say doctors give up on anorexics too easily. 6 months is also incredibly subjective. When you speak to palliative care doctors, they say that it's a guesstimate when you're talking beyond days as a matter of life expectancy. Finally, what I would say is that there are some very experienced lawyers who don't think that in law this sort of distinction will hold up. That the law, if it's, as Charlie recommends, and as is in this bill, is passed, it will be subject to discrimination-based challenges in the courts under the European Convention of Human Rights.
Very briefly, Charlie, if I'll come back to us, if you would, on that point about European discriminatory cases being taken.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I can happily say, completely wrong. The European Court of Human Rights and all of the high courts in England have said the question of assisted dying is absolutely for the legislature. And we will respect what the legislature does. And it is completely wrong to suggest that there is any realistic prospect of a challenge succeeding.
Right, Sonia, 10 seconds on that.
This is wrong. You've got experienced cases who disagree with Charlie. What the courts have said is whether to legalise assisted suicide at all is a matter for Parliament. Once it is legalised, it will be subject to discrimination-based challenge.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. A good deal of light and not much heat. So thank you both. I commend you both. Thanks indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.